something that I had a bit of a laugh at was Australia's government released this came out of the news, out of a podcast. So the Australian government released a paper, book recently, saying that Australia's at risk at certain climate change events in the next 30 odd years, and that certain targets were going to need to be met. Now, there were scientists, so scientists, politicians, interest groups, all had their fingers in the pie of the report. So that, I mean, it's one of those things that I saw commentary the other day suggesting that the sudden disappearance of people arguing about or for or against climate change recently is been because, well, the protest class can only think of one thing at a time, and they're currently focused on Palestine, but also the idea that this whole climate change stuff is an opinion of luxury. It's an opinion that can only be held by the wealthy, and that when that wealth dries up, your priorities shift back to survival, and hence you're seeing a shift. And people obviously are blaming Trump. It's all Trump's fault. No, people are just using that as an excuse so they can back out of things without being blamed for it themselves. But this paper came out, this release came out, and um, one of the things that sort of stuck in the back of my mind after a while was whenever you hear the government telling you there's a problem, we're here to fix it, is that you should never believe that. It's often a means to redirect funds into places that can be hard to track, or new interest groups, all this sort of stuff. I think things like an inconvenient truth actually did more harm to the environment than Al Gore intended, and that the number of claims made during it, and given the difficulty with getting people to agree to do things environmentally thereafter, and the fact that the sky's falling hasn't happened. There's a lot of chicken littles out there when it comes to climate change and everything else. Now, will there be significant weather events in the future? Yes. Will there be significant droughts and floods and extreme weather conditions at times? Yes. Has there been in the past? Yes. Are there going to be more or less? We don't know. We believe that there will be more, but that's only based on the models we can create. Now, my argument to all of this is it's like listening to somebody in the stock market. If you really knew what you were doing, why aren't you using that ability to create accurate models for those purposes? The the longer, the more effort goes into understanding the climate and everything else, the better we are at understanding the various drivers of both weather and climate. And so, for example, 20, 30 years ago, 30 plus years ago, the idea of an El Nino and La Nina weather events were kind of starting to come into public consciousness. The idea of a weather driver for the Australian continent being the Southern Oscillation Index, which has to do with weather patterns in the southern oceans, and therefore sort of drove how the weather fronts, etc., passed through Australia. Now, the ability to predict El Nino and La Nina events is poor. I mean, just today there's an article saying a surprise La Nina event. Well, okay, it's okay, it's weather. People will argue it's weather, not climate. Well, La Nina is probably more on a scale that is climate based more than weather, given the scope of how it applies. And it it's it's a question of, are we seeing more of these events because we're recording them better? It's like the idea that rogue waves were not considered seriously for centuries until maybe 20 or 30 years ago when they started being able to record them effectively. They'd always existed. They'd always had effect, but until they got seen, they were dismissed. So when it comes to the climate report that's come out, now where I've covered what I consider the spectrum of environmental concern, from environmentalism, conservatism, sustainability, and exploitation, and where I think people should sit, which is somewhere between conservation and sustainability. That yes, we should conserve as much as possible of the natural environment that has been untouched as possible, but for those elements of the globe where humans are doing things, that we should aim for sustainability. Now, part of that sustainability includes things like power generation, waste management, uh, management of water resources and water availability, all that sort of stuff. And the idea that, quite realistically, we're going to have resource wars in the coming centuries, particularly over availability or access to fresh water. That'll happen. But at the same time, we shouldn't go all chicken little, because natural processes are happening that were always going to happen, but people disregarded in order to settle in locations that were never going to be viable long term, such as settling on coral atolls. Now, the natural formation cycle of a coral atolls is that eventually they'll disappear below the waves, not because of sea level change, but because of the nature of what they are. Same goes for building along certain coastlines. Looking at whether or not that coastline is destructive or generative. That the way the ocean currents and the waves act upon the coastline will be either to deposit sand and build more coast, or to eat away at it. Now, you look at pretty much anywhere people have been building things on the coast, there's going to be examples where building things like breakwaters has negatively affected the coastline, either up current or down current from the breakwater. And so people then having to build, so engage in sand pumping or dredging in order to reconstitute those areas of the coastline that are now heavily eroded. Now, there's going to be a corresponding area that's now being silted up because the ocean can't deposit the sand or mud in the location that it would normally do so, and so you've changed the local processes somewhat. By the same token, the idea of building on barrier sand dunes and then wondering why your suburb got washed out to the ocean next time there's a hurricane is, well, short-sighted to begin with. I mean, there's a reason barrier dunes exist, that they're there to absorb the worst of storm surges and things like that to then further protect the soils and terrain further inland. Now, if you build on your barrier dunes, you're going to, or remove their protection, you're going to lead to increased salinity and stuff. You're going to get storm surges penetrating further inland. You're going to have a bad time. Bit like, I guess, the wards of New Orleans that are built below the water table. When the pumps died and the canals were breached during Katrina, of course they were going to flood. That's not climate change. That's just people building in a location that should never have sustained human existence. People do all sorts of weird things that should never have sustained long-term building, or they should have accepted that it was always going to flood. And the same goes for all sorts of things and places and whatnot. So there are local variations, and the idea of being sustainable is that, well, we want to pollute the environment as little as possible because that affects the ability for it to be sustainable. But at the same time, we need power, we need energy generation, we need to have a compromise and an understanding. And the same goes for these renewables. The idea that the total life cycle costs have to incorporate manufacturing and disposal. It can't just be the 5 to 15 years that the solar panel sits on your roof. You've got to have a detailed appreciation and understanding of, well, how many rare earths or what sort of pollution was involved in manufacturing? Have I irreparably harmed a biome elsewhere in the world purely for the ability to virtue signal a solar panel? And what happens to it when it runs out of life? Can it be reclaimed, or does it then pollute landfills somewhere and therefore potentially leach into a waterway? Are there chemicals within it that are going to affect it? I was talking about the wind generation turbines of using exotic composites, that it can be very, very difficult to reclaim a composite or to recycle it. And yep, existing power generation systems are often quite dirty and have terrible life cycle ownership as well. But we shouldn't pretend that renewables are significantly better in that regard. There are drawbacks to them as well. And having a government come out and say, oh, you've got to do this, you've got to reduce emissions, you've got to do X, Y, Z. It's like, well, you're going to put the brakes on the economy in some places doing that. And you then got to question who's going to benefit from it. It's like the water trading, for the trading of water rights in the Murray-Darling Basin. They were horribly oversold because people used to flood irrigate and a lot of the water returned back into the waterways. People got more efficient, kept their allocations, but started drip irrigation or other low evaporation schemes, and so we're more directly using a larger portion of their allocation. But if the river had been sold 4 times over, by the time you get 25% of the way down the water flow, there's no water left. But the idea that you're going to take someone's water allocation away from them, that didn't go down well with farmers, nor did it go down well with the people who's established businesses selling water rights trading, like carbon schemes trading. There's ways to scheme around things, and so when these sort of things come out, you've got to look at it. It's like, well, how many people are benefiting from it? Who's got some trading scheme set up that's going to exploit the people that it should really be benefiting, or because they're going to make a buck? And so the idea that there's going to have these 2035 emission schemes and stuff, And the reason we're one of the biggest greenhouse gas emitters per capita, one, we have low per capita per amount of space. We still have a range of primary industries that generate a lot of greenhouse gases. I mean, not so much anymore. I mean, steel mills are closing around the place. I mean, bauxite mining and production of aluminium still generates stuff. We are natural gas producers. Are they counting emissions of subsequent burning of oil and gas from the Australian fossil fuels elsewhere as contributing to Australia's emissions? I mean, sometimes there are some papers that do that. So, yeah, they're looking at 2005 levels, and well, quite reasonably, quite expectedly, no one is happy with the government. There are people who say you're not going far enough, and others that you've gone too far. It's boy. I mean, it's great to have a target. It's always good to seek efficiency. Be more efficient in using the power that you've got. Be more efficient in using the resources you've got. Be more sustainable. Aim for those targets. Most certainly. But don't be delusional about the impact or the actual cost of some of this stuff. So, okay, renewables backed by gas and battery storage. Okay, so, well, we're not completely abandoning fossil fuels, but I mean, the gas generators have the benefit of being very, very quick to spin up. They have a different pollution profile to coal and oil. But battery storage, that's an interesting one. Battery tech is continuing to improve, but it can be very, very, very problematic still. And the idea of the battery storage is kind of to cover the gap in production that renewables often have, i.e., no sun at night, intermittent wind, that sort of thing. And I mean, even pumped hydro has a problem because you've got to flood valleys and all sorts of parts of the environment to build the dams. And they use a lot of concrete. Concrete emits greenhouse gases when it's curing. It's like there's no one good answer. And of course, well, environmental groups are saying you're not targeting hard enough, and industry is saying no, you're going to put the brakes on too hard. Yeah, well, it's it's interesting. I mean, 2030, 2035, what, that's 5 years away? Oh, surprisingly, it's a couple of elections away. 70% cut by 2035. It's like saying, oh, we're going to have all electric vehicles by 2030, and then watching as the manufacturers go, that's not going to happen. Oh, and then never mind the fact that your power supply, your domestic power supply is constant brownouts and blackouts at random times of the year. No. We can support having all electric vehicles sucking down even more power out of the circuit. And like, no. So, and the causal links. It's yeah. I can understand why Trump withdrew from the Paris Accords, but the Greens, no surprise, saying targets are dangerously low. I mean, still, you're asking for almost 3/4 reduction in emissions. I mean, even 2/3, which is like the lower range, that's still pretty decent. I yeah, I think it's because it's a not liberal as in the party, liberalised as in a leftist government doing it. That's why think they've had the chance to do this. I mean, the Australian energy network, electricity network is, yeah, I don't think they're going to put the funding. Yep, the funding's nowhere near what's needed for everything. And obviously, well, the opposition doesn't know what it's doing, to be honest, in this regard. But yeah, I, yep, I kind of agree with this statement. It's, yeah, I mean, we're about to see an article in a little bit talking about how the price of everything is outpacing inflation and everything else. The climate risk assessment, that's what the thing that they released was. So, yeah, climate risks, rising sea levels and heat waves. And I was like, well, what country do you think we live in? What continent do you think we exist on? It's like, uh, I mean, certainly do your best to make it more comfortable to people to live in the extremes of weather. Uh, build better housing that is more appropriate to the environment. Try not to build in floodplains, except that you can't build where people have built. No, that's too hard. Too much money in that. So yeah, I mean, uh, this is just, I guess, the article that grounded in Fantasyland that also backed that up. I mean, it's yeah, even reaching so an industry grouping here, reaching even that 2/3 is going to take a lot. And yeah, it's making a lot of assumptions that I don't think are necessarily um, necessarily achievable. Now, Twiggy Forest, interesting comments from him. I wonder what he sees down track, but yeah, that comment doesn't cost him anything, to be honest.